They buried my husband on a Saturday in October, and 17 days later, I found a key taped to the underside of a feed trough that opened a storage unit in a town I had never been to. Inside that unit was a crib, a rocking chair, a child's drawings pinned to a corkboard, dated across 23 years. And on the far wall, framed in oak, my husband had cut himself from a tree on our own back pasture, a wedding photograph. Not ours, his, with another woman. They had been married for 21 years before the day I stood in that doorway, which meant for 21 of our 43 years together. My husband, Clayton Hollis, had been a bigamist, a liar, and the father of 3 children I had never met. And the worst of it, the thing that cut deepest when the dust finally settled, was that he had done it all on our land. My land, the land my grandfather cleared in 1928 with nothing but a pair of Belgian draft horses and a stubbornness that ran down 3 generations before it landed in my hands. My name is Wanda Hollis. I am 67 years old, and I have worked this farm in Harrison County, Iowa, every single day since I was strong enough to lift a bucket. This is the story of what my husband hid in that storage unit, what he did to my family's land, and how a quiet farm woman who had been called stubborn her whole life finally turned that stubbornness into something the county courthouse is still talking about. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know who's sitting with me tonight. Before I tell you about the storage unit, you have to understand the land, because the land is the beginning of everything. My grandfather's name was Elias Ellsworth. He came west from Ohio in 1924 with a wife, 2 daughters, and a deed to 80 acres of bottom ground along the Boyer River that his own father had bought sight unseen from a railroad company liquidating parcels after a failed expansion. When my grandfather first walked that ground, it was half scrub timber and half swale, and the neighbors told him he'd been sold a worthless piece of low country that would flood every 3rd spring. He stood on the rise above the swale, looked west toward where the Luss Hills rolled up out of the prairie, and told my grandmother, "Nell, I believe these people have never seen what a man can do with a drainage ditch." He drained it. He cleared the scrub with horses and an axe, and later, with a crawler tractor, he bought used in 1939 and kept running until the day he died. By the time my father was born in 1931, the 80 acres had become 240. By the time I came along in 1958, the Ellsworth farm was 460 acres of black Iowa loam that could grow corn taller than a man on horseback. My grandfather used to say that the land had been tested by water and found worthy, and that no Ellsworth had the right to sell a single furrow of it without the consent of every Ellsworth who came before and every Ellsworth yet to come. I was the only child my parents had. My mother lost 2 before me and 1 after, and by the time I was 10, she had made her peace with the fact that the farm would pass through a daughter instead of son. My father never minded. He taught me to drive the combine when I was 12, to weld a broken cultivator by 14, to read a grain contract by 16. He taught me to walk the fence line every spring before the cattle went out, because a fence that held last year might be the fence that fails this year, and a broken fence in May meant a neighbor's lawsuit in June. He taught me that the land keeps a ledger we can't see, and that every debt to it gets paid eventually, one way or another. He died in 1994. My mother followed him in 1997. The farm came to me whole and unencumbered, and 2 weeks after my mother's funeral, I signed the papers at the Harrison County Courthouse that put the deed in my name alone, Wanda Hollis, sole owner in fee simple, for 162 acres, sections 14 and 15, Township 79 North, Range 43 west of the 5th Principal Meridian. Sole owner. My father had insisted on that language. He had lived long enough to see my husband Clayton, a man who had come to farm as a hired hand in 1981 and married me in 1982, and he had never said a word against him, but when it came time to write his will, my father had been very clear with a lawyer in Logan. The farm passes to Wanda, not to Wanda and Clayton, not to Wanda or her heirs jointly with any spouse, to Wanda, alone, in fee simple. I did not understand at the time why my father was so firm about it. I understand now. Clayton was a good farmer. I will say that honestly, because the truth deserves a whole picture, not half of it. He could read a sky better than anyone I ever knew. He could tell you 3 days out when a storm was going to hook south off the Missouri River Valley, and whether the hail would hit our south quarter or pass us. He rebuilt the engine on the John Deere 4020 twice without a manual, and he could weld a hitch pin in the dark during calving season. He worked hard. For 30-some years, every dawn of every day, he worked hard on the land my family had built. What he did not do was love it the way my grandfather had loved it, or the way my father had loved it, or the way I loved it. For Clayton, the farm was a job. A good job, a decent job, a job he took pride in. But it was not a calling, and it was not a covenant. And he never once in 43 years of marriage stood on the rise above the swale and understood why my grandfather's hands had shaken when he first walked that ground. I used to think that was just a difference in temperament. Some people love land, and some people only work it. I used to think it didn't matter, as long as the work got done. I was wrong about that, and about a great many other things besides. We never had children. I want to tell you plainly, because it matters to what came later. Clayton and I tried. For the first 8 years of our marriage, we tried, and we sat in a doctor's office in Omaha in 1990, and a specialist told us it was nobody's fault. It simply wasn't going to happen, and we drove home in silence on Highway 30, and we did not speak of it again for nearly a year. When we did speak of it, Clayton said he was at peace with the way things were. He said the farm was enough family for any man. He said he was grateful every day for what we had. I believed him. I held on to those words for 33 years. I held on to them through every Christmas when it was just the two of us at the table, through every graduation ceremony at the high school in Missouri Valley where I watched other women's grandchildren cross the stage, through every long January evening when the wind came off the prairie and rattled the windows, and I wondered if the quiet was a kindness or a punishment. He had said he was at peace. He had said the farm was enough. I did not know, sitting across from him at that kitchen table for 33 years of suppers, that somewhere outside of Onawa, Iowa, 41 miles northwest of our farm, my husband had 3 children, and another wife who called him by a name that was not quite his own. His stamp of peace, his gratitude, his enough. He was a good actor. I will give him that. 2. The people in Harrison County knew me as Wanda Hollis, but to the older farmers who remember my father, they still call me Elias Ellsworth's granddaughter, and that was a name that mattered when the auction flyers went out or when a neighbor needed a hay baler on short notice. I was respected. I was the woman who kept her fences tight, paid her note at the bank in February, and never once let a field go fallow without a reason. I served on the co-op board for 11 years. I sat on the vestry at the Lutheran Church in Logan. I judged the 4-H beef show at the Harrison County Fair every August from 2001 until the year Clayton died. What none of them knew, and what I did not know myself until the autumn I'm about to tell you about, was that my grandfather had left something on that land besides the drainage ditches and the black loam. He had left a secret in the ground. He had put it there deliberately, with the help of a lawyer in Council Bluffs whose grandson would one day be the man to pull the string that unraveled everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The last conversation Clayton and I had before he died was about hay. Second cutting was late because the rain had come through on the 15th, and we couldn't get the mower into the south quarter until ground firmed up. Clayton said he'd drive the old F-350 down to the co-op in the morning and pick up 2 rolls of bale wrap. I said he'd need to take the lane that runs past the pond because the main drive had a washout the county hadn't fixed. He nodded, drank the last swallow of his coffee, and said, "I'll be back before supper." Those were his last words to me. I'll be back before supper. He did not come back before supper. He came back in an ambulance at 10 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, and the paramedic told me that my husband had driven himself into the ditch on County Road L 14 and been dead before the truck came to rest against the fence post. Massive stroke. No pain, the paramedic said, as if that were a consolation prize. I stood in the yard in my barn coat and my rubber boots, and I heard him saying it, and I did not cry. I did not cry for a long time. My grandmother used to say that there are griefs that sit down inside a woman and take their boots off before they decide how long to stay, and Clayton's death was one of those. It sat down. It unlaced its boots. It looked around for a comfortable chair. The funeral was on the following Saturday at the Lutheran Church in Logan. 300 people came. Clayton had been well-liked in the county, and he had been the sort of man who remembered the names of other men's wives and the ages of other men's children, which is a talent most farmers admire. I stood in the receiving line in a black dress that had belonged to my mother, and I shook hands until my arm was numb. And a dozen times during that afternoon a man I had known for 30 years clasped my hand and said, "He was a good one, Wanda, a real good one." And I agreed because I believed it, and because agreeing was the expected thing, and because I could not have said anything else even if I wanted to. 17 days later, I found the key. I was cleaning out the old feed room in the horse barn, a chore I had been putting off for months, because Clayton had made it his own over the years, and I did not want to disturb his things too soon. The feed room was where he kept his rubber boots, his rain gear, his work gloves, a calendar from the Onawa feed, and supply that I had always thought was strange because we had never bought feed from Onawa. Onawa was out of our way. There was a feed store in Logan and another in Missouri Valley, both closer, but the calendar had been on that wall for as long as I could remember, and I had never asked about it, because I had learned early in our marriage that Clayton did not like to be asked about small things. I took the calendar down off the nail. The paper had faded to a yellowish cream along the edges, and the staples holding the pages together had rusted through, and the picture on the cover was a photograph of a harvest sunset over a cornfield somewhere that wasn't here. I turned the calendar over to throw it in the burn barrel, and that was when I saw the envelope. It had been taped to the back of the calendar with strips of silver duct tape, for strips worn smooth, a small brown coin envelope, the kind my father used to keep washers in. I peeled the tape off. The envelope had weight. I opened the flap. A key, a single brass key, heavier than a house key, dull with age. Attached to it with a bit of baling twine was a small cardboard tag, and on the tag in Clayton's unmistakable handwriting, the blocky printing I had seen on 10,000 feed receipts and farm ledgers, were 3 lines. Heartland Self-Storage, Onawa, Iowa Unit B, 17. I sat down on an overturned bucket, and I looked at the key in the palm of my hand. And the grief that had been sitting in my kitchen for 17 days with its boots off stood up and put its boots back on and got very, very quiet. I had been married to Clayton Hollis for 43 years. In those 43 years, I had never known him to pay for anything in cash if he could help it, and I had never known him to keep a secret that mattered, and I had certainly never known him to drive 41 miles to Onawa for any reason I had not been told about in advance. I looked at the key for a long time. Then I put it in the pocket of my barn coat, and I walked back to the house, and I poured myself a cup of coffee that had been sitting on the warmer since 6 in the morning, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I began to think. The next morning I did not drive to Onawa. I want you to understand why. Because it matters. My grandfather used to say that a man who runs at a problem loses the ground under his feet, and a woman who runs at a problem loses worse than that. He said the first thing to do when you find a broken thing is to sit with it until you understand the shape of the break. Only then do you reach for a tool. So I sat with it. I went to the bank in Logan, the Harrison County State Bank, where my family had banked since 1931, and I asked to see the last 10 years of our joint statements. Annette Pritchard, who has been a head teller there since before her own children were born, brought me a stack of printouts as thick as a Sears catalog and put me in a back room with a cup of coffee and the door shut. Because Annette is the kind of woman who understands when another woman is looking for something and does not need to be asked twice. I went through every statement line by line. I am good with numbers. My father made sure of that, and so did 30 years of running the books on a working farm. I had always handled our household money. Clayton had handled the farm account, the big account, the operating line, the one the grain checks went into and the one the equipment loans came out of, but the household account, the personal checking, the savings, those were mine. I saw every dollar that moved through them, or I thought I did. It took me 2 hours to find a pattern, and when I found I had to set the pages down and walk to the window and breathe for a while before I could go back to work. Every month, on the 3rd business day of the month. Going back as far as the records went and further than that, Annette said she could pull microfilm from the 90s if I wanted her to. There was a cash withdrawal from Clayton's personal spending allowance, $200, every month, for 300 and some months. $200 a month is not a lot of money for a working farmer. I had never thought twice about it. Clayton drew a personal allowance of $350 a month out of the farm account, the same allowance my father used to draw, and it was his pocket money for gas and lunches at the Logan Cafe, and a new pair of work gloves when he needed them. I drew the same allowance myself. The $200 cash withdrawals had always lived inside that $350, and I had assumed, for 30-some years I had assumed, that he was spending on the things men spend pocket money on. A beer at the Legion, a tank of gas on the way to Omaha, a part order from Napa, $200, every month, for 30-some years. I did the math on the back of Annette's deposit slip. 32 years, 384 months, $76,800. Give or take, $76,000 of my husband's monthly allowance. Gone. Not a fortune. Not enough by itself to raise suspicion. Spread thin enough across time that no one would ever notice. But there if you knew to look. I knew to look now. I drove home from the bank that afternoon on Highway 30, and I passed the exit for Onawa, and I did not take it. I drove past it at 60 miles an hour, and I watched the sign shrink in my rearview mirror, and I told myself, not yet, not until I understand the shape of the break. That night I called a lawyer, not a lawyer in Logan, not a lawyer who knew Clayton or knew the farm or knew my family. I called a woman named Delphine Marchetti in Council Bluffs, whose grandfather had been my grandfather's lawyer in 1952, and whose name had come up twice in my father's old files when I had been going to the safe after the funeral. I told her who I was. I told her my grandfather's name. I told her I had found something I needed to talk about before I did anything else, and I asked if she would see me the next morning. She said she would. She said to bring the bank statements, the deed to the farm, my grandfather's will and my father's will and my own will, and anything else I thought might be relevant. And she said one more thing. She said, Mrs. Hollis, if you have found what I think you have found, do not go to that storage unit yet. Do not go alone, and do not go without me. I did not ask her how she knew there was a storage unit. I found out later that her grandfather, in 1952, had put something in my grandfather's that my grandfather had not told anyone about, including my father, including me, including any Ellsworth living or dead since, and Delphine Marchetti, who had inherited her grandfather's files along with his practice, had been waiting for an Ellsworth to walk into her office for the better part of 40 years. That, though, is a piece of the story I need to come back to in its proper place. For now, I want you to picture me at the kitchen table that night, after I hung up the phone with Delphine Marchetti. The house was quiet. The farm was quiet. Clayton's chair was empty on the other side of the table, and his coffee cup was still sitting on the drain board where I had washed it the day he died and could not quite bring myself to put away. I sat at that table with the brass key in front of me and 17 days of grief in my chest, and something else, something new, something that had not been there an hour before. Cold, clear anger, the kind that does not shake, the kind that does not cry, the kind that sits down with you at the kitchen table and asks you quietly over a cup of coffee going cold, well, what are you going to do about it? I looked at the key, and I told it, we're going to find out what you open, and then we're going to find out everything else. And then, when we know everything, we're going to decide, not before. That is how the story really began. Delphine Marchetti's office was on the second floor of a brick building on Pearl Street in Council Bluffs, above a shop that had been a soda fountain when I was a girl and was now a place that sold candles and soap. The stairs were narrow and the hallway smelled like furniture polish and old paper, and her door had a frosted glass panel with her name painted on it in plain black letters. Marchetti, attorney at law. No firm. No partners. Just her. She was younger than I had expected from the phone. Maybe 45, maybe 50. Dark hair pulled back. Reading glasses on a chain. A gray suit that looked like it had been made to wear, not to impress. She met me at the door with a cup of coffee already poured and told me to sit down, and she did not waste time with small talk, which I appreciated. I laid everything out on her desk. The key, the bank statements, the deed, my father's will, my grandfather's will, the photograph of Clayton and me at the 4-H fair in 2009 that I had brought because I wanted her to see what it looked like in case it mattered. She looked at the photograph for a long moment before she looked at anything else. Then she said, Mrs. Hollis, before you tell me anything else, I need to ask you one question, and I need you to answer as carefully as you can. Did your husband ever, at any time in your marriage, ask you to sign a power of attorney, a durable power, a farm management agreement, a joint tenancy document, a quitclaim deed, or any other paper giving him the right to act on your behalf regarding the land? I thought about it. I thought hard. I said, no. She nodded slowly, and something in her shoulders relaxed a quarter inch, and she said, good. That is the first good piece of news. Now tell me everything. I told her everything. I told her about the key, the Onawa feed and supply calendar, the $200 withdrawals, the 41 miles to Onawa, and the fact that Clayton had never once in our marriage mentioned a reason to go there, the phrase Unit B-17. I told her about the way my father had insisted the farm come to me sole, and alone in fee simple, and about the fact that I had never understood why he had been so firm about it. I told her what Clayton had said to me the last morning of his life. I'll be back before supper, and how it had turned out to be one more promise in a long line of them I was no longer sure I could trust. She listened. She did not write anything down. She let me finish. Then she said, Mrs. Hollis, I have been practicing estate and property law in this county for 22 years, and I will tell you honestly that what you are describing is the oldest story in the book. A man living 2 lives on one woman's land. 9 times out of 10, the woman finds out in a will or a funeral, and 9 times out of 10, by the time she finds out, the other family has already positioned itself to claim something. Sometimes a house, sometimes a land, sometimes just a piece of the retirement. The damage is usually done before the wife knows there is damage to do. She set her coffee cup down. But your grandfather, she said, did something in 1952 that I think changes the picture. My grandfather drafted it. I have a copy in a file behind my desk that has been sitting there since 1984, when I cleaned out my grandfather's old office after he died. It has been waiting for you, or for someone like you, for a very long time. I am going to show it to you now, and then we're going to Onawa. She stood up. She walked to a file cabinet in the corner. She pulled out a gray folder, and she laid it on the desk in front of me, and she said, Mrs. Hollis, your grandfather was a cautious man. He understood something about land and marriage that most farmers of his generation did not understand until it was too late. Read this, then we'll talk. I opened the folder, and I began for the first time in my 67 years to understand who my grandfather had actually been. The document in the folder was a supplemental instrument to my grandfather's original deed, dated November 14th, 1952, recorded at the Harrison County Recorder's Office, and filed in the land abstract under a cross-reference my father had apparently known about but never discussed with me. It was written in the careful, pinched handwriting of Delphine's grandfather, a man named Anselmo Marchetti, and it was 3 pages long. The first page established a life estate, which I already understood. My grandfather had built one into his will to protect my grandmother during her widowhood, and my father had later adapted the structure for my mother. The second page was something different. It was a recorded covenant, filed as an encumbrance on the title itself. That did 2 things I had never known about. It established a restrictive clause stating that no conveyance, mortgage transfer, or lien placed upon any portion of Sections 14 and 15 could be recognized by the county recorder without the personal signature of the fee simple Ellsworth heir executed in front of 2 witnesses and notarized by a notary with a current commission on file in Harrison County. No power of attorney, no agent, no spouse, no representative could sign in the heir's place. Only the heir themselves in person. And the second clause, the one that made me sit back in my chair, established that the mineral rights under all 462 acres had been severed from the surface rights in 1952 and placed into a separate perpetual trust held by the Marchetti firm as trustee, with the sole beneficiary being the living fee simple Ellsworth heir at any given time. Those mineral rights could not be sold, leased, assigned, or encumbered by any other person by any means whatsoever. Not by a spouse, not by a child, not by a creditor, not by a court. They existed in a legal vessel that could be touched only by the one living Ellsworth, whose name was on the deed. My name. I looked up at Delphine Marchetti, and I said, Are you telling me I own the mineral rights to this farm in a way that nothing Clayton did could touch? She said, Mrs. Hollis, I am telling you that your grandfather, in 1952, saw what a great many farmers in this country did not see until it was too late. He saw that oil and gas leases were coming to western Iowa eventually, and that pipelines were coming, and that in the 50 years to follow a great many farm wives would lose their land to husbands who had gambled it, mortgaged it, leveraged it, or signed away without them knowing. And he designed an instrument that made his land untouchable by anyone except the blood heir whose name was on the paper. I have been waiting, Mrs. Hollis, to see whether any part of that instrument would ever be needed. I am afraid you have walked into my office on the day it is. She paused. There's a pipeline company, she said, that has been attempting to route a carbon dioxide sequestration line through western Harrison County for the last 3 years. They approached my firm 18 months ago about obtaining easement rights and mineral lease access across a corridor that runs directly through sections 14 and 15. We declined because we are the trustee and the beneficiary had not been consulted, and we had no authority to proceed without your involvement. 6 months ago, the company told us they had already begun negotiations with the fee owner, which at that time we understood to be you. I stared at her. I have never spoken to a pipeline company in my life. I said, No, Delphine said quietly, but I suspect someone who represented himself as your husband has. And I suspect he's been collecting option payments against a lease he had no authority to grant. And I suspect that if we drive to Onawa today, we're going to find the paperwork for it. We drove to Onawa in her car. She did not let me drive. She said that she had been in this situation with clients 3 times before, and that every time the client had insisted on driving, and every time the client had regretted it. And so we took her sedan and she drove carefully on Highway 30, and we did not talk about much of anything for 41 miles. Heartland Self-Storage was on the south edge of town, between a grain elevator and a boarded-up farm implement dealership. A chain-link fence, a gravel drive, a row of orange roll-up doors with the paint peeling off. The office was a double-wide trailer with a hand-lettered sign that said open. A woman was at the counter, mid-60s, reading glasses, a cardigan. She looked up when we came in, and when she saw me, she did something peculiar. She tilted her head the way a person does when they're trying to place a face. Can I help you? She said. Delphine spoke first. My name is Delphine Marchetti. I am an attorney representing the widow of a man who has been renting a unit here for some time. Unit B, 17. I have a death certificate, a court letter of administration, and the original key. We would like to open the unit today. The woman's eyebrows went up. B, 17 is Clayton Hollis. Clayton Hollis is my client's late husband, Delphine said. This is Mrs. Wanda Hollis. She is his legal widow. The woman looked at me. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said very slowly, Ma'am, I'm awful sorry, but I have to tell you that Mr. Hollis has been renting that unit since 2002, and he comes in to pay the rent in cash every 6 months, and the next payment is due in November. And I have to tell you that he comes in with a woman, and I have always believed, because he introduced her to me on the first day, and he has never said otherwise in 23 years, that the woman was his wife. I did not say anything. She was in here 2 weeks ago, the woman said, paying on the unit. She said her husband had passed. She said she would be back to clear it out when she had the strength. I gave her my condolences. I looked at Delphine. Delphine said very gently, Could you tell us the name on the contract? The woman opened a file cabinet behind the counter and pulled out a manila folder. She opened it. She read from the top of a contract. Clayton R. Hollis and Louise M. Delacroix Hollis. Post Office Box 1147, Onawa, listed as husband and wife. Contract dated March 14th, 2002. Louise M. Delacroix Hollis. I had never heard the name before in my life. Delphine said, We're going to need a copy of that contract, and we're going to need to see the unit now. Unit B, 17 was at the end of the second row. Delphine walked ahead of me. She turned the brass key in the lock. She slid the latch over. She said, Mrs. Hollis, whatever is in here, it has been in here a long time, and whatever it is, we are going to deal with it together. Are you ready? I said, Open the door. She rolled the door up. I want to tell you what I saw plainly, because I think it matters that you see it the way I saw it. The unit was 10 feet by 20 feet. The walls had been painted, not the raw concrete of a storage unit. Actually painted a soft cream color, the kind of cream a woman picks for a nursery. The floor had been covered with a remnant of blue carpet, clean, vacuumed. There was a window unit air conditioner that had been hooked up to an extension cord, and it was humming quietly, keeping the space cool. Along the left wall was a crib, white, a mobile hanging above it with little cloth elephants. The crib was empty, but the blanket was folded neatly at the foot, and the mattress was made up with a fitted sheet that had tiny blue stars on it. Along the right wall was a rocking chair. Oak! Clayton's work. I knew his joinery the way a woman knows her husband's handwriting. He had made that rocking chair. I had never seen it before. On the back wall, above a small oak dresser he had also made, was a cork bulletin board. And on that bulletin board were photographs. Dozens of them. A little girl at a kitchen table with a birthday cake, 4 candles. A little boy in a T-ball uniform, grinning with a gap where his front tooth should have been. A teenage girl at a piano recital. A teenage boy in a football uniform, a young woman in a college graduation gown, the same children at different ages, arranged chronologically from the left side of the board to the right. The most recent photographs were of 3 grown adults, 2 women and a man, late teens to mid-20s, and beside them was a smaller photograph of a toddler, a little girl with dark curls. Clayton was a grandfather. I was looking at a room where my husband had been a grandfather. Above the bulletin board, mounted in a frame I recognized at once as Clayton's work. Courtesan oak hand-beveled, the exact pattern of joinery he'd used on the headboard of our own bed in 1983, was a wedding photograph. A younger Clayton, maybe in his late 30s. A woman beside him with dark hair and an ivory dress. They were standing outside a small church. The bride was holding a bouquet of white roses. The groom was smiling in a way I had never seen on my husband's face in 43 years of marriage. A smile like a man who has just been released from a room he was tired of being in. I stood in the doorway, and I did not move. Delphine stepped inside. She moved carefully. She went to the dresser, and she opened the top drawer, because the top drawer of a dresser in a room like this was going to contain the paperwork, and we both knew it. Inside the top drawer was a metal lockbox. On top of the lockbox was a manila envelope with my name on it. Wanda, it said, in Clayton's handwriting. Read this last. Delphine picked up the envelope. She did not open it. She handed it to me. She said, Mrs. Hollis, I think you should sit down. I sat down in the rocking chair. The rocking chair my husband had built with his own hands in a storage unit in Onawa for children who were not mine. I did not rock. I held the envelope in my lap, and I looked at the wedding photograph, and Delphine went through the lockbox one document at a time, and she laid each document out on the blue carpet in a neat row, and when she was done the row went the full length of the unit. If this story is moving you, hit the like button and turn on the bell so you never miss another story like this one. I needed a minute, and so maybe you do too. Here is what was in the lockbox. A marriage certificate from the state of Nebraska, issued in Cass County on March 14, 2002. Clayton R. Hollis and Louise M. Delacroix. Witnessed by 2 names I did not recognize. The certificate bore the seal of the state of Nebraska and the signature of a county clerk. It was, by every appearance, a valid record of a legal marriage ceremony. A birth certificate for a girl named Odette Marie Hollis, born September 8, 1998, in Monona County, Iowa. Father listed as Clayton Ray Hollis. Mother listed as Louise Marie Delacroix. My husband, for years before the Nebraska marriage certificate, had put his name on a birth certificate as the father of a child. A birth certificate for a boy named Bo Clayton Hollis, born April 2nd, 2001. Same father, same mother. A birth certificate for a girl named Pearl Ann Hollis, born June 19th, 2003. Same father, same mother. 3 children, 3 Hollis children, 3 grandchildren of my grandfather Elias Ellsworth's farm. Legally speaking, if the name on the certificate was to be believed. A lease agreement, dated 2004, for a rented house in Onawa, Iowa, signed by Clayton R. Hollis and Louise M. Delacroix Hollis as co-tenants. A mortgage agreement, dated 2009, for a house in Onawa purchased in the name of Louise M. Delacroix Hollis, with Clayton R. Hollis listed as co-borrower. The mortgage was still active, and the monthly payments had been drawn, according to the statements clipped to the agreement, from a bank account at First National of Onawa, held in Louise's name alone. A series of bank statements from that First National account going back 19 years. Regular deposits, $2,000 to $3,000 a month, showing the source as transfer from an account at Harrison County State Bank. Not our household account, not the farm operating account. A third account, one I had never known existed, at our own bank in Logan, opened in Clayton's name only in the year 1994. For years after the Omaha doctor had told us we would not be having children. For years after we had sat at our kitchen table, and Clayton had told me he was at peace with the way things were. And then, at the bottom of the lockbox, the document that Delphine Marchetti picked up last and read through twice before she said a single word about it. An option agreement for an underground carbon dioxide pipeline easement, dated 14 months ago, granting the pipeline company a right-of-way corridor across sections 14 and 15 of Township 79 North, Range 43 West. Signed on the landowner line by a name that looked almost exactly like my handwriting. Wanda E. Hollis. Notarized. Witnessed. Recorded. Except I had never signed it. Delphine held the document up to the light. She turned it slightly. She said, "Mrs. Hollis, will you show me your signature, please? Sign your name for me on this legal pad." I signed my name. She held the option agreement next to my signature, and we both looked at them together. The W was wrong. The W on the agreement had a loop at the top that my W had never had. The E, my middle initial, was backwards, curved the wrong way. The way you would expect a forger to get it wrong if they had seen my signature once, maybe twice, and tried to reproduce it from memory. "Mrs. Hollis," Delphine said, "we have a crime. Your husband, or someone working on his behalf, has forged your signature on a recorded property instrument. That is felony forgery under Iowa Code 715A.2. The option payment listed here, $47,500, have been paid to a bank account that I am going to bet a significant amount of money is the same First National of Onawa account we are looking at in the statements on the floor beside us." I looked at the statements. The deposit was there. 14 months ago. $47,500. Routed from the pipeline company's escrow account directly into Louise Delacroix Hollis's personal checking. Then I picked up the envelope with my name on it. I opened it. Clayton's handwriting, 5 pages, dated 2 days before he died. "Wanda, if you are reading this, I am gone. I have known for 18 months that my heart was a give out. The doctor in Missouri Valley told me last spring, and I did not tell you, because I did not know how. I did not know how to tell you about any of it. I am going to try now. I met Louise in 1994 at a farm equipment auction in Onawa. I was not looking. I want to tell you that plainly. I was not looking. But I met her, and I knew within a month that I had found something I had been missing for a long time, and I did not have the courage to leave you, because leaving you would have meant leaving the farm, and the farm was the only life I knew how to live. Odette was born in 1998. Bo was born in 2001. Pearl was born in 2003. They are good children. Wanda, I raised them as best I could on the weekends. I said I was at farm shows, and the Thursdays I said I was at the co-op board. Louise raised them the rest of the time. They are the great regret of my life, and they are also the great joy of my life. And I do not expect you to understand how both of those things can be true, because I do not understand it myself. I want you to know that I never took anything from you that I did not replace. The money I sent to Louise came out of my personal account, the one I opened at the bank in 1994. I never touched the farm account. I never touched your household money. I am telling you this because I want you to know that whatever else I did not steal from the farm. There is one thing I have to confess to you. The pipeline. I signed your name on the option agreement last year. I am not proud of it. I did it because Louise needed the house paid off, and because Odette needed help with her graduate school, and because Pearl's daughter needs a surgery next year that the insurance won't cover. And I did not know how else to get the money without telling you everything. And I was not ready to tell you everything. The option payment is in Louise's account. If you find this letter before the pipeline goes through, you can repudiate the agreement and pay back the option money, and no easement will be granted. If you find it after, I don't know what you can do. I am sorry. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to know that I knew it was wrong and I did it anyway. And that is on me, not on Louise and not on the children. The children are not mine to give you. I have no right to ask you to acknowledge them. But if you ever wanted to meet them, I have told Louise your name, and I have told her that if the day ever comes, she is to welcome you. That is my last wish, and it is the only wish I have no right to make. I loved you, Wanda. I want to say that even though I know you will not believe it, and you will not want to hear it, I loved you in a different way than I loved Louise. I loved you like a man loves a place he has been living in for a long time. I love Louise like a man loves a fire on a cold night. Both of those are real loves, in their own way. I know that does not make it right. Nothing makes it right. Take care of the land. Clayton. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I sat in the rocking chair in the storage unit, and I looked at the wedding photograph of my husband and another woman, and at the crib and the dresser he had built with his own hands, and at the birth certificates of 3 children who shared my grandfather's blood and my grandfather's name to the back door of a second secret marriage. And I thought about my grandfather, about the day he stood on the rise above the swale in 1928, and told my grandmother that nobody who bought that land had ever seen what a man could do with a drainage ditch. I thought about the covenant he had recorded in 1952 and the mineral trust, and the restrictive clause that required the heir's own signature, in person, notarized, witnessed. My grandfather had seen Clayton Hollis coming. My grandfather had seen him coming in 1952, 29 years before Clayton walked onto the farm, and he built a legal vessel that made it impossible for a husband, any husband, to give away the Ellsworth land. My grandfather had known what most farm women learn too late. Delphine Marchetti was standing in the doorway of the storage unit with her arms folded, waiting. I stood up out of the rocking chair. I said, "We're going to the courthouse on Monday. We're going to repudiate that option agreement. We're going to file a criminal complaint for forgery. We're going to get the pipeline company's $47,500 returned to them from Louise's account, with interest. We are going to protect the land exactly the way my grandfather meant it to be protected." I paused, and then I said, "We're going to Onawa, because I need to look at Louise Delacroix in the face, and I need to decide what kind of woman I am going to be about her children. Not for her sake, for mine, and for my grandfather's." Delphine nodded once, sharply, the way a lawyer nods when her client has just saved her a speech. "Mrs. Hollis," she said, "your grandfather would be very proud of you. He was always going to be proud of me." I said, "That was never in question. The question was whether I was going to be worthy of him." The weeks that followed were the busiest of my life, and also the quietest. Busy, because the legal machinery Delphine set in motion required my hand on every gear. Quiet, because I did it all without telling anyone in Logan or Harrison County what had happened. I am a private woman. The land is a private thing. I was not going to let the story of Clayton's second family become the story of the Ellsworth farm. The land had nothing to do with what Clayton had done. The land was going to outlast him and outlast me and outlast everyone involved, and I was not going to let it be dragged into a scandal it had not earned. On Monday, Delphine filed the repudiation of the option agreement at the Harrison County Recorder's office. She filed it along with 3 affidavits. My own affidavit attesting that I had not signed the instrument, a handwriting expert's preliminary affidavit, obtained over the weekend from a forensic document examiner in Omaha who had worked with Delphine's firm before, and a certified copy of the 1952 restrictive covenant showing that the pipeline company had accepted a signature instrument that, by the plain terms of the recorded covenant on the title, was legally incapable of binding the land. The covenant had been on the title for 73 years. The pipeline company's title search had either missed it, or the attorneys had made a decision to proceed anyway on the assumption that a 73-year-old covenant would not be enforced. They had made a mistake. The covenant was enforceable. The covenant was clear. The covenant had been written by Anselmo Marchetti in 1952, and it was still doing its work in 2025. On Tuesday, Delphine faxed a demand letter to the pipeline company's general counsel requesting the immediate cessation of all survey and preliminary construction activity in the corridor, the return of the option payment to an escrow held by the Marchetti firm pending resolution, and the tender of a written apology acknowledging that the company had relied on a forged instrument. The pipeline company's attorneys called back within 3 hours. By Thursday afternoon, the option agreement had been formally rescinded. The $47,500 had been clawed back from Louise's account under an emergency injunction, and the company had agreed to pay the Marchetti firm's fees for time spent on the repudiation. They wanted no part of a criminal forgery case that would appear in the trade press. They wanted the problem to go away. Delphine made it go away. On Friday, I walked into the county attorney's office in Logan with Delphine beside me, and I filed a criminal complaint against the estate of Clayton R. Hollis for forgery in the first degree, and against Louise M. Delacroix Hollis for receipt of stolen property and conspiracy to defraud based on the pipeline payment that had been routed to her account. The county attorney was a man named Parnell Vasquez, whom I had known since he was 7 years old, because his grandmother had been in the women's auxiliary at the Lutheran church with my mother. He read the complaint. He read the covenant. He read the forged signature. He looked up at me and he said very quietly, "Wanda, I had no idea. I am so sorry. We will pursue this fully." I said, "Parnell, I don't want a circus. I want the law applied. If she gives back everything she has wrongly received, and if she agrees to a civil settlement, I am willing to recommend probation rather than prison. I am not interested in destroying a woman whose children did nothing wrong. I am interested in the truth being on the record and the land being made whole." Parnell Vasquez said, "Wanda, that is more mercy than most women would show in your position." I said, "My grandfather was a hard man, but he was a fair man. I am trying to be what he was." On a Tuesday in mid-November, Delphine Marchetti and I drove to Onawa for the second time. We did not go to the storage unit. We went to the little blue house on Ash Street that belonged, according to the deed on record at the Monona County Courthouse, to Louise Marie Delacroix Hollis. It was a clapboard house with a wide front porch and a maple tree in the yard that had turned orange and dropped half its leaves onto the lawn. A woman came to the door when we knocked. She was younger than me by maybe 12 years. Dark hair that had gone mostly silver. She was wearing jeans and a sweater. When she opened the door and she saw my face, she knew. She did not need anyone to introduce me. She put her hand on the doorframe to steady herself, and her eyes welled up, and she said, "Mrs. Hollis, I have been expecting you for a long time." Delphine said, "Mrs. Delacroix, I am Attorney Marchetti, representing Mrs. Hollis. May we come in? We would like to speak with you privately." She let us in. The living room was small, with a piano against the wall and a basket of yarn beside an armchair and photographs on the mantelpiece of 3 children. The same 3 children I had seen on the bulletin board in the storage unit at different stages of their lives. A calico cat was sleeping on the back of the couch. Louise sat down. Her hands were shaking. I sat across from her. I looked at her for a long time before I said anything. I wanted to see her. I wanted to see the woman Clayton had built a rocking chair for and put photographs of 3 children up in a storage unit for. I wanted to see whether she was a monster or a fool or something else entirely. She was something else entirely. She was a tired, sad woman in a cardigan with a cat on the couch, who had loved a married man for 23 years under a lie he had told her that she had chosen to believe. I could see it on her face. She had not known, or she had allowed herself not to know, which is its own form of not knowing. I said, "Mrs. Delacroix, did Clayton tell you he was divorced?" She did not lie. I will give her that much credit. She said, "He told me you were estranged. He told me you were separated in all but paperwork. He told me that you lived on a farm that had been in your family for generations, and that you would never sign the divorce papers because of the land, and that he had made his peace with the arrangement. I believed him for a long time. I believed him until about 10 years ago, when my oldest was applying to college and needed a parent's signature on a financial aid form, and Clayton said he could not sign it because his name was on too many documents already and it would complicate things, and I realized something was wrong. I confronted him. He admitted you were not estranged. He admitted you lived together. He said he loved us both. He said he was trapped." She took a breath. "I should have left him," she said. "I did not leave him. I had 3 children in a house and no career of my own because I had stayed home to raise the children on his money, and I did not know how to be alone at 46. I told myself that staying was the same thing as being trapped, and that if Clayton was trapped then I was too, and we were in it together, and the only victim was the unknown woman on a farm who did not know we existed. I told myself she must be happy in her ignorance. I told myself it was a kindness. She looked up at me. I was wrong, she said. I knew I was wrong. I told myself a story so I could live with what I was doing, and I lived with it for 15 more years, and now my children are grown and my husband is dead, and the woman on the farm is sitting in my living room, and she is not happy, and she is not in her ignorance anymore, and the story I told myself is just a story, and I am not going to tell it to you. I am not going to ask for your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, Mrs. Delacroix, the pipeline money has been returned. The forgery is a matter of record. The county attorney in Logan has indicated he will pursue charges against the state and against you for receipt of stolen property. But I have told him that if you cooperate fully and return everything Clayton gave you that came from my land, the house, the bank account balances, the furniture he built, any asset traceable to the Ellsworth farm, I am willing to recommend probation. You will not go to prison. Your children will not lose their mother. But the house will be sold. The account will be closed. The furniture will be returned to me. Everything my husband gave you that he had no right to give, you will return. She was crying, silently, tears running down her face. I understand, she said. I am not finished, I said. I need to know about your children. Do they know who I am? Yes, she whispered. Clayton told them last year when the doctor told him about his heart. He said he wanted them to know everything before he died. He said he had not been brave enough in life, but he wanted to be brave enough in death. He told them about you. He told them about the farm. He told them he was sorry he had not been the father he should have been. They were furious with him, Mrs. Hollis. All three of them. Odette did not speak to him for 6 months. Bo has not spoken to him since. Pearl is the youngest, and she is the gentlest. Pearl told him she loved him, but that she could not forgive him, and that she would not forgive him, and that she hoped he would not die before he had apologized to you. She was angrier with him on your behalf than she was on her own. I thought about that for a while. Then I said, Mrs. Delacroix, I am going to ask you for one more thing, and then Attorney Marchetti and I are going to leave. I would like to meet your children. Not today, not soon, but eventually, at a time of their choosing, in a place of their choosing. They did nothing wrong. Their father and their mother made a choice that has cost them a great deal, and they have paid for that choice without earning it. I am not their grandmother. I am not their stepmother. I am not anything to them, legally or morally, but they share the blood of a man I was married to for 43 years, and they share, through the strangest door imaginable, the same grandfather I share at the front door, my grandfather Elias Ellsworth, whose land their father worked for 30-some years. If they ever once see that land, they have my permission to visit it. If they do not, I will not trouble them. But the door is open. Tell them that. Louise Delacroix put her face in her hands and wept. Delphine Marchetti, beside me, looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. We drove back to Council Bluffs in silence until we reached the county line, and then Delphine said, Wanda, in 22 years of practicing law, I have never seen a wronged woman do what you just did. What did I do? I said, you kept your dignity. She said, you kept the land. You kept the law. You kept the door open for 3 innocent people who did not ask to be born into this mess. And you did not lift a finger to destroy the woman who hurt you, when the law would have let you destroy her. That is not the common thing. Wanda, that is a rare thing. I said, Delphine, my grandfather told me once that the land is a ledger. Everything gets paid eventually. If I had destroyed Louise Delacroix, I would have added a debt to the ledger that would have taken my whole life to pay back. I was not willing to do that. She drove for a while. Then she said, your grandfather was a remarkable man. Yes, I said, he was. I want to tell you how the story ended, because the best stories do not end when the crisis ends. They end when the new life begins. By Christmas, the house in Onawa had been sold, and the proceeds, minus Louise's reasonable living expenses for 6 months, had been returned to my accounts. The First National of Onawa account had been closed. The furniture from the storage unit had been trucked back to farm, not because I wanted it, exactly, but because it was my husband's work, and because my grandfather had taught me that a thing a man makes with his hands contains a piece of him, And you do not throw those pieces in a landfill. You put them somewhere and let them become whatever they're going to become. I put the rocking chair in my parlor. I put the dresser in the spare room. The crib I gave to a young couple at the Lutheran church in Logan who had just had their first baby. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories on screen right now.